All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning / afternoon. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. And then at the end, inshallah, when we have time for Q&A, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at that point. I'm going to introduce my colleagues from CISNA. I received an interesting question at the beginning. What does CISNA stand for? It is the Council of Islamic Schools in North America, and we're an organization that has been around for over 20 years. And we serve Islamic schools around the country and in Canada, and now have actually ventured into international schools as well. Our focus is on accreditation and professional development and advocacy for Islamic schools. We are in the process, those of you that are members of CISNA or are accredited by CISNA have some experience with our accreditation process. We are currently working with Cognia, the largest international accreditation agency in the world, and becoming a lead accreditor. So we will shift from being an add-on accreditation to taking the lead, where an application for accreditation with CISNA actually, and will also provide the school with accreditation with Cognia at the same time. So CISNA will take the lead, come in and do the accreditation process, and then an approved accreditation for CISNA will also mean that the school is accredited by Cognia. And we will have more information on that coming in the next couple of months, inshallah. I want to begin by just again reminding everyone and myself how important it is for us to continually work on self-improvement as Islamic schools, and that is one of our major goals as CISNA. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our guest speakers today. I'm going to just take a minute to introduce them, and I'll have them to little more about their background as well. We have Afshan Parlberg, who is an assistant research scholar with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. She serves as the project director for the Ihsan Standard, a community engaged research and legal project of the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. And then we also have with us today, Sana Salim, who is a visiting assistant clinical professor with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And I will just have them, as they begin, tell a little bit more about their background as they begin the presentation, inshallah. Welcome, everyone, and please begin.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much, Dr. Leila and CISNA, and to all of you for joining us today. We're really excited to be here, and we hope that this presentation is helpful and beneficial, inshallah, for all of you, and you gain knowledge being here today. Dr. Leila, is it okay if I share my screen? Got some slides I'm going to share here.
You should be able to share. Okay.
All right. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I know that some of you have shared your name and school in the chat, and as we're getting started today, if you're able to share the mission of your school, we'd love to just see what the missions of your school are as well. So feel free as chatting today if you can chat that in. But we're excited today to provide an overview of what nonprofit governance looks like and how that can help benefit your schools. We are going to cover a wide variety of information, so we're not able to go quite as deep, but we're hopeful that this is a good starting point and a starting conversation for what you can take back to your schools and to your communities. I'm going to let Sana share a little bit about the project, and then we'll kind of get started from there.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Sana Salim. I am based in Indiana and Indianapolis, similarly to Afsha. I'm with the IU Lilly School of Philanthropy. just kind of diving right in, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on where we are. So Afsha and I are with a project of the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative called the Ihsan Standard, and kind of where we are in the umbrella of everything. So Indiana Lilly School of Philanthropy, within that, there's an organization called the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. The Muslim Philanthropy falls within that. And we are the Ihsan Standard. We are just one of the many projects of MPI. And I can actually put their link in the chat here in a minute if anyone is interested in kind of the academic research and reports that MPI puts out every year. It's really amazing work that they do, and to be affiliated with a pretty big state university is just shows how there's a need for this work, there's an interest in this work, and we're just happy to be part of it. The kind of getting into some more details of what the Ihsan Standard, what we do, we kind of break it out into 3 prongs. So we provide legal screenings for nonprofits. It's confidential and it's free thanks to the generous funding of the MLFA, which is the Muslim Legal Fund of America. They're based in Dallas. I'm sure those of you from Garland and these areas have heard of MLFA. So they fund our work so that we can provide these pro bono legal screenings. Right now, we're offering them to clients in Texas and Indiana. That's where Afsha and I are licensed. And inshallah, we plan to roll it out to more jurisdictions, but for now it's Texas and Indiana. The second prong of what we do are law and leadership workshops. So those are similar to what we're doing today, covering a variety of topics, not just board governance, but just international giving, different topics, different areas that nonprofits are doing work in, and anything that we can do to help provide some legal guidance and best practices guidance in those areas. So starting 2023, inshallah, we're going to be doing those every other month. So if you're interested, maybe also throw your email in the chat and we can kind of keep track of your email, and then inshallah we'll send you our registration links moving forward in 2023 if you'd like. The third part of what the Ihsan Standard does is research. So participate in research and then learn. We'd like to get research and data and conduct surveys from the nonprofits that we're working with in order for a couple of reasons. One, to help the MPI side and help kind of that academic research and building on the research just of Muslim giving. And this all kind of started that after 9/11, there was just such a scrutiny of Muslim organizations and the money that was being sent abroad, and even money that is being kind of donated here locally. So I think there was an interest in understanding the philanthropy, understanding Muslim philanthropy, where it's going. I think some people saw it as discouraging, maybe that there was a little bit more of an IRS interest, but on the flip side, it provides just practical a disciplinary study for us to kind of think critically. We can do the interdisciplinary research, teaching, training, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where our research comes in. This QR code, remind me, Afsha, where that QR code leads us. Is that to our website?
Yeah, this takes us to our project. If you're Texas or Indiana based and want to explore a legal screening, you can use the QR code.
Right. So feel free. This is one of those, for those who aren't familiar, you take your phone, you turn on your camera, and then it should bring up a yellow link on your phone, and it'll lead you directly to our Ihsan Standard website. If you have any colleagues in Texas or Indiana, please feel free to send them our website. We'd like to, as any good lawyer, I have to give a legal disclaimer that today's presentation includes general information. It does not constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship between us and you. So that's my legal disclaimer. Afsha, you can give your any extra info if you want to.
Sure. Instead of talking about myself, we're going to share these slides over after the presentation. But just to share, Sana and I are both heavily invested in our communities and in the Muslim community. We both have background nonprofits from a legal perspective and from a community perspective. And we're excited to be here with you today for that purpose. And so I'll let Senna talk a little bit about what the hour and a half together will look like with some variation in timings.
Sure, you guys can kind of skim through this. We're going to start with the presentation for, about 45 minutes. We're already a little bit cutting into that time, but no, there's no problem at all. We'd like to make this interactive. So we generally want to hear about your experience with your school. So we have some hypotheticals and some, we'll kind of workshop with the hypotheticals. We'll break out for 8 minutes to kind of discuss what we've talked about. And then we'll have more discussion. Sorry, the break is 5 minutes, and then we'll have discussions in breakout room to discuss the presentation. And if how you can, we want to make this as practical as possible. So not only just giving you the information, but starting to apply that and just starting to kind of get the wheels turning to how you can take this now to your organizations and apply it to your organizations, inshallah. That's the goal. And then we'll close it out with some discussion and further questions. Our email addresses should be somewhere in the slides. I'm not sure if they're in that previous slide. If not, we'll add that to the chat as well. Or maybe Sister Layla can share that when she shares the video recording so that you can get in touch with us. If you have any follow-up questions, we'd love to hear from you, and hopefully, inshallah, we can answer. A couple of just general things for the next, hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes. As with any kind of group Zoom call, or if you're in a conference room, we just want to be mindful that we are all here together. We're all taking each other's time and space today. We are here. We want you guys to be present. Another thing kind of down here on this list is using I statements and speaking from personal experience. That's kind of the goal, is to share your own personal experience. Be cognizant of, we want you to feel free to speak for sure, but be cognizant of, I guess, how much you're speaking and how much time you're taking. Things might get uncomfortable, but we welcome discomfort. We can disagree on things, but we don't ever want to shame or blame. And then one of the things down at the bottom that I really like is, if you can, if possible, we'd love to see your face and use your camera. It is a small enough group that I feel like we can do that, especially during the discussions. You don't have to during the presentation, but especially once we get to kind of the Q&A and breakout rooms and discussions, I just feel like it increases inclusiveness and makes it a little bit more personal, as much as we can on Zoom. When we're all together, I mean, I don't care if you don't raise your hands, but if there's a lot of interest in the conversation, there's a little icon, I think, on Zoom where you can raise your hand. And I'm really hoping this is a vibrant discussion, inshallah, and you guys can learn from each other and the school, each other's schools, and kind of how things are working or not working with your schools, inshallah. So I will turn it back over to Afsha, and she'll kind of get started on the presentation portion.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to dive in, and Senna and I are good at making up for time, so don't worry about the timings listed in here, but wanted to give everyone a quick pop quiz on a Saturday afternoon or morning. Can type your answers in the chat or just think them in your head, but got pictures of 3 different Islamic schools across North America and Canada and the US, and just curious to see what you think. How are they similar, and what do they have in common? Oops. I don't think I shared any answers. I'll give everyone 30 seconds to think about their answers. And hint, it's related to today's topic, so. So each of the pictures up here, and we've got one response that they are related to Islamic teachings. I think that's definitely true. Islamic values connected to the masjid. And those are actually all accurate statements. But what we were going for is really a thought process into what we're going to be discussing today. I won't name where each of these are, but they actually have all experienced internal conflicts between board members and parents, and or between board members and community, and that has spilled over into, this is not confidential, these are spilled over into public spaces where they have either gone to litigation or arbitration and have led to just some messy issues. One of them actually led to a physical altercation on the space of Atlantic School property. And just by show of hands, have any of you ever seen or heard of conflicts within boards or communities? Because I know that these are not the only ones out there, but they have spilled over into a very public and visible way. And what we're here today is to kind of go through how that could look differently for your organizations. Just another pop quiz, but you have not much time to respond. So first answer that comes to mind, what are the top reasons that religious organizations get sued or taken to court? Those are some really good answers, and I agree, they do have beautiful buildings. I like what's coming up here in the chat. Some responses, is it property issues, not trained staffs? Conflicts can be healthy and are okay. Lack of professionalism. So these are the top 5 reasons that places of worship actually get sued. And the first should raise a red flag for all of you because you work with minors, and whether or not there are appropriate practices or policies in places for your school. Not that this is happening in your schools, but it's a common issue that happens in places of worship. And I think it's important to, in some way, think about how these could or could not happen in your schools or mosques. Property disputes is second, personal injury issues, zoning issues, and insurance coverage disputes. And what we're here today is to kind of think about, well, how do we prevent that? How can we have good leadership that is preventing preventable issues? And the good news is that good governance is a great way to prevent conflicts that spill over into these types of things. I agree with the comment that conflict can be healthy and conflict can be good. It can also be unhealthy if there's not good ways to manage that type of conflict. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. So what are the main duties of directors or trustees? There's 3 legal duties. These get codified into state statutes. So when you go to your state statute, you're not going to see it listed as duty of loyalty. You're going to actually see it in the nonprofit statute. But what you see here is duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. And we'll talk a little bit about what each of these. The primary overall responsibility in general of directors is strategic planning, organizational oversight, setting the mission, values, and purpose of the organization, and taking an active, vocal, and visible presence without, I should say, micromanaging in the day-to-day affairs of what has been delegated to staff or principals or executive directors. So there's different roles for board and for staff, but there is an important need for trustees and directors to pay attention and to actively govern what's happening, right? We see this as a verb, not as a noun. So when we talk about governance, think about it as like an active physical thing that is ongoing rather than something that sits on a shelf in a set of bylaws, okay? And these things involve things like selecting the CEO, thinking about preventing self-dealing, ensuring that the laws of your state and of the IRS are followed. So this is an example from the Indiana nonprofit statute. However, each state has its own statute. And these are the types of governing resources that you would look at if you were a board director trying to understand what are the laws and the rules that apply to our organization. So you've got the state statute, you've got the federal code. And then for your organization, you have your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, and your policies. It gets a little tricky, and we may have an opportunity to talk about this in our breakout rooms. You may have an umbrella organization or a mosque that is the actual, nonprofit institution, and then you have your own separate board for your school, but they're affiliated under one organization. And that gets a little bit tricky, and we can kind of talk about ways that sometimes looks. But in general, this is a good way to think about how, what types of documents you should be looking at when you're trying to evaluate the legal context of your nonprofit. So let's start with the duty of care. So duty of care is, are you paying attention as an ordinary, prudent person would to the affairs of your organization, right? And so we're looking at basic things, right? Are you prepared and attending meetings? And are you showing up and asking an informed questions? So let's say your school board has 12 meetings a year. Are you showing up to 11 or 12 of those out of the year, having read the previous minutes from the previous meeting, having read the agenda, having reviewed the budget? Or are you showing up to one of those and coming late and not necessarily involved in understanding what's happening, right?
نحن اصلا نستخدم الحمامات اعمل لك.
So we've got, this is where you're trying to act in good faith, right? And you don't have to do this all on your own. You may not have the expertise of a financial background, but you can rely on the expertise of lawyers, accountants to try to answer and make good, informed decisions that are in good faith. And I'm trying to keep up with the chat here, but if I miss something, Sana or Dr. Leila, feel free to flag it if it's something that's a clarifying question. We're going to watch a quick video here, but this is an example of what it means to be prepared for meetings. And I think in this hybrid world and in just a regular world, I think this is something I'm sure each of us has come across at least one. So let me share this video for, if nothing, a little bit of humor relief. Here we are.
Trip Crosby
has joined the meeting. Beth has joined the meeting.
Hello?
Tyler?
No, this is Beth from ICS.
Oh, hey, Beth. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Yeah. Just making it,
Tyler?
Has joined the meeting.
All right, well, this is Trip. Who's here? Tyler's here.
Beth's here.
Okay, the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the...
Yeah, I'll be able to do it in like 30 minutes. John?
Has joined the meeting.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I was just trying to go over the purpose of today's meeting, which is to discuss the deliver... Tyler?
Has joined the meeting.
Sorry, guys, I got cut off. Is Paul here? Send him an invite.
Put in your access code.
No, that's your PIN number.
It should be a 9-digit number.
Try pressing the pound key.
Paul.
Has joined the meeting.
Any questions before we move on?
Yes, this is Beth. What's our best plan of attack for the second quarter?
Question
What
actually...
we should do.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I think
Well,
what we should do.
It actually depends on how you look at it, because the really Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Given sales, we're at a...
Let me just say that
Okay.
was a great graph, John. Tyler?
Well, my main concern with the projections from last year was that they're just insufficient. I mean, they're not even taking into account.
Did we lose Tyler again?
Hello?
John, are you guys taking distributions? John?
Oh, my bad. I was on mute. Let me start over.
So I've prepared a presentation. I'm sharing it with all of you. You should be able to see it on your screen right now.
Got it.
I don't see a link anywhere.
It says I need to download a plugin.
We are all using Macs, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
How can you?
Financials are looking great. Paul, do you have any comments on staffing?
I was thinking about that because we get a few more contractor types in. Hold on, I'm sorry. Rex, get down.
I don't know. I feel like when I look at the numbers, type that up, then I
To me, staffing is a huge impact. Is that me?
That's not me. I don't think.
I just want to go over a couple of details as we move into our next section here. We got 3 new departments coming on.
Break it up a little bit, guys.
By the end of Q3.
Driving to
So
a dead
I need
spot.
everyone to give me detailed evaluations each
Sorry,
month
guys.
so that we know. That's it, guys. Beth, you'll send out a recap email that could have basically taken the place of this whole meeting, correct?
Yep, always do.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Beth. Dave, you been here the whole time? Yeah. Huh. Well, thanks everyone once again. Oh, one more.
Okay. I imagine each of you has attended at least one meeting like this where only 1 or 2 people may have read half the documents and everyone is all over the place. And when we talk about governance, we're talking about the efficient use of our resources and time to really make some progress for many of the amazing missions that I've seen many of you put here in the chat. And when we're not showing up prepared for meetings, whether it's on a conference call or it's in person, you know, are we really making the best use of our time when we're all in the room, right? And so this is just maybe an exaggerated or not exaggerated example of what you may experience in a meeting and something to be mindful of when you are a director and showing up to meetings or a staff member. You know, I think this can apply in a variety of contexts, just to make sure that the goals and the purpose of the meeting are there and you're able to do your best job in the boardroom. And you've got a lot of responsibilities, right? So risk, managing risk for your organization, thinking about the legal risks, thinking about the financial risks of whether or not you have enough financial resources for your organization. Do you have the personnel or a succession plan for your key personnel? Do you have the type of insurance that you might need to mitigate some of those responsibilities as well? So there's a lot that needs to be done in a small amount of time, and making the best use of your time is really important. We're going to get a little bit into some of these a little later, but I'm going to move on to the next slide and also just think a little more about financial oversight. You know, the responsibilities of the board include making sure that the nonprofit or the school has adequate resources, and you may or may not use an independent audit. And if you do use an independent audit or are required to do one, and there are some certain thresholds where it's helpful to, are you reviewing that and understanding that and taking advice from what comes? Are you approving and monitoring the budget? That is key. Do you set and review executive director compensation or principal compensation? And are you making sure that transactions that may jeopardize your status are being reviewed and carefully looked at, right? So there's a variety of things that you have to worry about. And when you're in that room together, you want to make sure you make good use of time. Your second duty as a trustee is your duty of loyalty. And this is where you are prioritizing the organization over your own personal interests. So this was a great point put in the chat earlier. Conflicts are natural. They're going to happen. There's going to be a situation where a director has a paper company and your school needs a paper supplier. But whether or not that director should benefit from it over the benefit for the school is what needs to be evaluated, right? There's nothing wrong with being associated with people who are in the business or other industries. These are great uses and supports for our schools and for our nonprofits. But from a trustee and a director position, we need to understand whether there is a potential conflict and whether or not there are alternatives. There's a process to screening these types of circumstances, whether or not there's an alternative to that option and whether or not those alternative options are better, or whether the actual transaction with the business director is better, right? And kind of making an informed decision with disinterested directors. So there should be a review, a decision-making process to make sure that the organization takes priority over individual directors. And one of the important things here is to think about the, let me go back here actually. Sorry. When we're thinking about the duty of loyalty, we also want to think about, actually, this is a hypothetical we're going to go into a little bit later, so I'll leave it for that. But what we're really looking at is the role of disinterested members in prioritizing the organization. For comic relief only, so hopefully we don't have boxes in the chicken board room, but you kind of get the point here, right? And the third duty that we have here is the duty of obedience, which is making sure that we're following the governing documents. So if we have in our bylaws that we're going to meet 6 times a year, are we actually following through with what we say in the bylaws? I say that with a caveat because Sana is our staff attorney at the EHSAN standard, and she does a brilliant job of helping organizations understand how much to include in your bylaws so that you're protected versus creating a 50-page binding document that becomes part of these bylaws wars. When there is conflict that arises, people turn to it to create more conflict. So there's a fine line and there's an art to developing an appropriate standard for governing documents, but this is just to kind of say that making sure that if it is something that is in your articles of incorporation or in your bylaws, you're actually following through and making sure that you're following what you have in your legal landscape that we showed earlier. One of the things that I wanted to talk about in relation to the duty of loyalty and obedience is typically states have, and it applies a little bit to both, so I kind of moved backwards a little, but most states have something called a business judgment rule. And this means that they presume that decisions are made by disinterested directors and independently and in good faith. And they serve the best interest of the organization. But if we're not going through a process to make sure that we're evaluating or screening decisions that are being made in the boardroom, then the business judgment rule may not be a form of protection for your organization. And that can expose directors to private liability as well. Let me just take a look and see how we're doing on time. We're at 1:45, so I'm going to touch on a couple of these slides and move us ahead a little bit. But like I said, we can come back to this throughout that rest of the hour, and you'll have access to these slides afterward as well. These are just some important things to think about. What might be some practices, and you might be able to kind of resonate with one or two of these. Are there multiple governing bodies? I bring this up over and over because it's fairly common, I think, for Islamic schools to be associated with another organization and or for organizations to have multiple governing bodies. But there's only one governing body under the law. So we need to understand who that governing body is. And this may be a conversation that you take back to your school or to your mosque to really understand what the structure of your organization is. There's also sometimes not a great defined relationship between the board and the principal or the executive director. And what we do is we don't necessarily further our organization because we have micromanagement of day-to-day activities of what should the teachers be doing, but that's really a principal's job, right? So making sure that we've got enough to do and we have enough to go around, and we have these wonderful ways in which we want to benefit and support our communities with Islamic education. So if we can better define and clarify our roles, we're working together to ensure a mission rather than fulfilling one person's personal objectives. These are other additional ways in which you might see potential conflicts with tax exempt laws. And these are just some ways to think about good governance practices. So clarity comes up over and over. A lot of this is just about, transparency, clarity, and thinking about the ways that these are communicated so people understand it. And also just ongoing trainings. The fact that you guys are here today is an opportunity for you guys to benefit and think about how this can benefit your schools. But are you doing board orientations for new board members? And do they understand clearly what those roles are? Are there ongoing reviews of your bylaws, of your conflict of interest policies? And when there is a conflict, is it actually disclosed, or is it just a written policy on a shelf and a form that people sign every year? So if you have these, are you actually using them and putting them into practice? This is just a slide that may have come up for many of you during the COVID-19 pandemic. And these are the types of things you might have had to address as a board or as a school during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a role and a strategy and a leadership to be vocal and thinking about how these parts of your leadership to the organization are helping to move the organization forward. We're going to move into some hypotheticals, and you guys are welcome to raise your hands and or type some answers into the chat. But what we wanted to highlight here is some examples that might come up in a similar way for your organizations and how to think about them and how to analyze them. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this first one, but let's think about a school or a nonprofit that sets up a scholarship fund that supports only staff members' children. Is that okay? Are there any issues with doing something like that? And does anyone want to comment on whether they think there are any issues with doing that? So there's an issue of fairness that could come up. One is the perceptions of a community. Think about an Islamic school that's operating in a community and you're talking about scholarships just for the students of teachers. So one is like, are you actually promoting your mission in the community? So I think that's great to think about how that would be perceived. Is it perceived as fair or not? And then there's another comment about if it's available for all, then that would be okay. So what I actually really wanted to get to was thinking about this IRS concept of private benefit, where a nonprofit organization is actually set up for benefiting a bigger community, right? It's not just set up for a few individuals. So if you set up this type of system where you have a scholarship that's just going to a few select people, that's not necessarily in the realm of what a nonprofit organization is set up to do. And it's not necessarily an absolute, but you do need to see if this is insubstantial or incidental to what the main services are that are provided. And so this kind of provides like a gray area in which to think about when you're setting up these types of programs. There's a private benefit IRS analysis that you would want to apply before rolling something out like this. The second example here is about CEO, or I'm going to say principal compensation. So I'm almost certain that this doesn't happen here. My mom was a Islamic school principal for many years, so I will be surprised if this is a scenario that comes up in the scope of principal of compensation, but let's just say that it does, and it could come up in a variety of ways. But let's just say the school agrees to pay outside of the comparable salary that's determined a lavish living allowance. Lavish should be key. And that brings total compensation to compensation that is not comparable. Maybe I'm giving it away here, but this is something, again, you might think about in relation to the IRS private inurement type of document, right? The doctrine where you do need to make sure that as a board, you're looking at executive compensation and comparing it and using a process to do that. And you need to look at that in the totality, right? So we're not necessarily looking at this in line with just all for-profit types of things, or just all nonprofits, but you need to do a closer analysis, and you can rely on outside HR support. You can rely on others to help you do this analysis. You don't need to necessarily have all this knowledge yourself. This is just something you're responsible for and you want to be thinking about. In the third example that we have here, we've got 5 individuals who are also board members, and they lease property to a school. And the school funds or finances major improvements that increase the property value beyond the life of the lease. And again, this is, another thing that should be screened through your conflict of interest policy, because this again could fall into private inurement. And so we want to think about when we're seeing these types of things, they're normal, they're natural, but it's the job of the board to actively govern and think about what implications this could have within the legal landscape and whether or not this has any risks to your organization from that perspective. And so that's why these are being highlighted here. So you may think, okay, seems like these are all issues that raise some concerns and discussion, and that same type of thing would apply to this 4th example. You've got a service provider and they're engaged in a major project for your organization. And guess what? That company is owned by a relative of the board member. And again, here's an example of potential self-dealing where your conflict should go through, it's a potential conflict. So the board member should disclose that this is their relative's company. And then the disinterested board members should go through an evaluation process to see whether there are alternatives that could, again, this is duty of loyalty to the duty of obedience to the organization and duty of loyalty, right? You are making sure that the organization's interests are above the interested board member. And hey, if this company gives you not only great quality, but great price and is a better competitor than the other ones, it's not an absolute, but it needs to go through that process and that analysis to make sure that you're thinking about these things. And guess what? When I'm giving a paper company, I don't know why. I was printing some things this morning, papers on my mind, but another paper company in the community comes and is like, oh, you know what, that school is self-dealing. You're like, actually, no, we're not. We looked at a variety of quotes. We had a variety of bidders, and you have that document and that process in place, not only for IRS protection, but also for the protection of reputation and transparency in the community.
Afsha, can I interject for a quick second? I think a really common one on your previous slide, this last example comes up. if your school is having a fundraiser, or if there's some program, at the masjid on a Friday night, and what do? We order Zabiha food, and there's always a community member who owns the restaurant. So again, we're not saying that you can't give business to your fellow community member, but just do a little bit of due diligence, get some quotes together, have that paper trail that, it's not just because it's, the brother who's a board member who owns the restaurant or whatever, and that's fine if it is a board member who owns the restaurant and you're giving business, as long as it meets all the other criteria of it's a good price, it's good food, however you want to do it. But I don't know why your paper is on your mind and food is on my mind.
I like your
But I feel like that's an easy one, right? That happens all the time. We all order food from our favorite, shawarma place for the masjid fundraiser, whatever it is for the school fundraiser. So just keep that in mind. It's completely allowed as long as you're not giving business maybe to the same restaurant owned by the same board member every single time. So just keep that in mind. That's, I feel like, an easy and delicious example.
Yeah, and I like it better. I think I'm going to change that. So I'm going to skip over these slides. They're going to be in there for your reference, but thinking about, okay, what is the job of the nonprofit board collectively? We've talked a little bit about that, but we've talked about it from your legal duties perspective, and here it is summed up in a way. And then maybe some of the top challenges that you have faced either from principal or upper management or from a board perspective. And in essence, you both have the same goals of providing Islamic education for your community. So why not do it in a way where things are governed and managed in the optimal way to allow this to flourish in our communities? I told you we would make up for time. We're going to take a few minutes break, everyone grab a drink, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes and then jump out of breakout rooms and have some discussions.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Afshan. That was a wealth of information, and I have a couple of questions when we get back. But I know we're short on time. We do have maybe a 3-minute presentation from Brother William on our board retreat that's coming up. So if you want to listen while you grab your coffee, you can do that, and I can answer questions about that a little bit later. I mentioned accreditation at the beginning, and that is one of our main goals with CISNA. A large component and a very important component of that accreditation process is the governance piece, and the governance board applying best practices and ensuring that the leadership at the very top is doing what they need to do to ensure the success of the school. We do have a board retreat coming up in January. It is our first annual retreat, and I will let Brother William talk a little bit more about that, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Special thanks, Sister Afshan, Sister Sana, for your time and putting together this presentation. It's very helpful, and it's an example of what we want to offer to schools from CISNA to support governance, because governance is really one of the most common themes that we find when you go into schools, that we often focus and emphasize our teachers training, our principals training, but then thinking about governance training is often a little bit on the back seats, and really a lot of this starts at the top. So just a few quick questions. I'd like you to think of this for yourself as a board member or principal, anyone involved in schools, and on behalf of the people who are on your boards. So how long have you served on the boards? 1 year, 2, 5, maybe more. And when was the last time that you networked with board members from peer organizations? Spent significant time talking to people who have the same strengths, similar challenges that you may have that you could learn from. When was the last time, maybe besides today, that you experienced in-depth governance training, perhaps dedicating a weekend to learn and grow and become a better board member yourself so that you could greater impact your community? When was the last time that you had the opportunity to tour a state-of-the-art Islamic school campus? A brand new example of what many of our schools, inshallah, can be like in the near future. At CISNA, we are organizing our first board retreat. It's going to take place in January. I'll give some details about this. And we're really excited because We'll have CISNA board members present, but we'll also have an amazing team from an organization called Connect for More in Tampa, Florida. That's led by Liz Wooten-Reschke and her team. And this is a team of board consultants, nonprofit board consultants, and most of them have experience working with nonprofit organizations in schools. That's where they focus on. And during a 2-day opportunity, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we're going to have an opportunity to engage in a series of trainings. We also have, as I'm sure maybe Afshan Sana you may be familiar with, Dr. Shaduk Siddiqui, who is going to join us as well. And he is going to be focusing on the fundraising aspect, right? How to have essentially how the best ways to get funds, endowments to support your school. Other awesome topics are going to include roles and responsibilities of board members and school leadership. What are the differences? Where is their overlap? How to build and sustain an effective board. It's not just about having elections, but how are you constantly seeking new talent, right, to make that sustainable? Hiring and evaluating the school principal, chief executive, strategic planning, and as we mentioned, the fundraising best practices. Another opportunity that is very exciting is in between, obviously there are lunches, breakfasts, times to sit and do informal and formal networking. We're also working with other schools in the area to provide bonfire events where you can actually go with other board members, sit around in an informal way, and really talk about, learn from each other, develop those relationships so that you can share resources so that we can make our schools stronger. I mentioned the school tour. This is going to take place in Tampa. So many of you have heard about American Youth Academy. They've recently opened their multi-million-dollar school campus, $10 million. Yeah, I've visited many times, but I saw the old campus and I'm really excited to go visit and see what the new campus looks like. So there'll be a dinner event there, a tour, opportunity to talk to board members and school leadership about how they made this happen so that we ourselves can learn these valuable lessons and make the same, inshallah, happen for our communities. So the event, the information is here. You may have seen the flyer, but I want you to look at it more closely now. So it's going to take place in Tampa, Florida. It's going to take place, sorry, I got everything kind of blocked off here, from January 20th to 22nd, 2023. And this is designed in particular for board members. It may be a question. I know some people here are principals. If there are spaces available, we've talked about the opportunity opening it up for school leadership too. It's primarily for board members, and we have a very limited capacity on purpose because we want to make sure that we have high quality, engaging experience for everyone. So there are the topics that are there. And last bit before I finish here is how to register. You can visit our website, cisnausa.org. It's the first thing that's going to pop up on the homepage, but here is the direct link. It is important to register as soon as possible. Right now, we have about 15 hotel rooms remaining for that. And there are discounts available for CISNA members. And if you're a CISNA accredited member, it's the best price, but it's not available just for CISNA members. It's available for anyone who would like to come. If you're coming from a masjid and it's not really a school, so much of this information is going to overlap that it's going to be just as relevant for you, whether you are on a school board or a masjid board. So if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer it. But please don't miss this very unique opportunity. I think it's going to make a huge impact on our collective ability to influence the lives of our students in the future, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, Brother William. And we will have time to address any questions about the retreat at the end. Sister Azra has added the links to the registration in the chat. So if you'd like to click on that just to save it. And it is, I think, we learned very quickly when in the pandemic as school leaders, as principals, that we really needed each other. We really needed to network and share experiences and help each other get through this. And it really made our schools better. And we want that same opportunity for board members. We know that there hasn't been an opportunity for board members to do that. And it is really important. We're doing some of that today, but this is an entire weekend to really get to know other people around the country who are doing the same work. So thank you so much, Brother William. And we hope to see some of you in Tampa in January. And I will turn it back to Afshan.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Leila. And absolutely agree. Today, we're really just touching the surface, but this retreat sounds amazing. And I've served on many boards in many different organizations. And I can't underscore, not just from a legal perspective, but in terms of really elevating your presence in community, how good governance can make such an important difference. I know we're here today to really emphasize the legal aspect of it, but it touches every aspect of your organization, from ensuring good funds, which I know is often top of mind for many that are serving on a board, and to have a whole weekend dedicated to really thinking about this issue is amazing. And I'd really highly encourage you to consider joining and signing up if you haven't already. And Dr. Siddiqui is actually the director for the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. So we work together. This is one of the projects, and we're excited to see him on the panel. I'm gonna share my screen here briefly, and you can see if my breakout room skills are savvy. We can take Q&A into the breakout room, but we'd also just love to have discussion. If you have questions, great, but we'd love for this to be a space. We're going to divide up into 2 breakout rooms. Sana is going to be in one, I'll be in the other. And just to think about, okay, reflecting on today, are there questions that you have, or are there experiences that you think are important to take back to your organization? And we'd love to have just a conversation within each of our breakout rooms around that. And so it'll just be a little bit open-ended. We'll do that for about 20 minutes and then come back into the full room. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and answer one final question and then hand it over to Dr. Leila to close us out. And I'm also going to share my screen again, just to have anyone that would like to take an optional survey, this feedback on today's session through future sessions. We'd love your feedback. But we had a really great question that I think is a really closing question for us to chat about. And that is, how do we engage board members that may not be interested or are slightly disinterested and just not exercising the duty of care that they should? And there's discrepancy between board directors. Some are highly, highly engaged, and others are more of a ceremonial name. And how do we change that? And I think the answer is not over. I think it's by changing and adopting a structure and a practice. Like I said in the beginning, governance is an action, it's a verb, and it requires ongoing activity. And that may mean that between now and your next election cycle, you implement a few things so that during the next election cycle, you're starting to build in these more routine governance practices, and you're recruiting individuals who understand that those are their expectations. So there may be a job description for a board trustee or a board director. And as they're going through an interview process, they realize it doesn't have to be an extensive thing, but there's clear-cut understanding of what those expectations are. And then, as I also mentioned in our small group discussion, it's really important to onboard your new directors through something like a board orientation, whether that's in 1 or 2 parts. And again, you're re-emphasizing the expectations, maybe having them have a board buddy, maybe one of those active board members, so that they're excited and enthusiastic. And now they have some tangible ways in which they know they should be participating. So I think it's a shift, and it's not an overnight on and off switch, but a switch to the way that we run our organizations that can take a few rounds and will continue to be active practice. And I'm excited to see that there's interest in our schools in adopting those types of practices. I have this last slide up here. This QR code is a survey. So it's not the same QR code in the beginning, but if you want and are able to take a picture and participate in this, I think it's just like 2 or 3 questions, a brief survey to give us feedback on today. we're always looking for ways to improve and better serve our communities. And so I put the link in the chat as well. And then I'm also gonna, if it's okay, plug just our next Law and Leadership workshop by emailing people. We have one coming up in December where we're gonna talk about research findings. So if you put your email in the chat, I think we'll be able to get a copy of the chat later and send that to you. But thank you, Sharon, for having us here today. This was a really wonderful opportunity for us to spend this time with you. We hope, inshallah, that this benefits you and your communities and your schools, inshallah. And we're so grateful to Sisna and Dr. Leila and the board and the team for inviting us to be here with you today. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Leila, who's going to round us out for the hour and a half. And inshallah, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Great. Thank you so much, Sister Afshan and Sister Sana. Jazakumullah khair. There were many great gems to take away from this.